Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, and share buttons. Today we're going to talk about a number of headlines, both directly and indirectly related to Bible prophecy. So let's dive right in. This first article I want to discuss today is from Breitbart. It says, Farage vindicated, EU will set up first rapid deployment military force by 2025, claims report. The European Union has reportedly set its sights on establishing a 5,000-man rapid deployment military force by 2025, a report has claimed, in what appears to be the most concrete development in the EU's desire to have its own military. Lawmakers in Brussels are reportedly in the concrete planning stage for establishing a 5,000-man rapid deployment military intervention force, a report has claimed. Euro-federalists across the continent have been eyeing the creation of such a force for some time, and the potential formation of a European military force was a key feature of Britain's 2016 decision to withdraw from the European Union. When Brexit leaders like Nigel Farage warned of the hard Euro-federalist direction of the bloc, they were dismissed as believing in a, quote, dangerous fantasy. Yet Farage is being vindicated on the point. Once again, according to a report by the German newspaper Die Welt, an agreement on the creation of the force is expected to be reached as early as Tuesday, that's today, with it set to be granted competency for evacuation and stabilization missions. The former of these tasks reportedly involves the escorting of civilians out of a threatened area, such as with the recent airlift of various foreign nationals and intelligence assets out of Afghanistan, while the latter involves the EU military force being deployed in a region for the purpose of securing, quote, stability and a short-term peace. With it being hinted that the force could be sent to Ukraine for the purposes of engaging in this peacekeeping function, the report indicates that such missions could constitute the force arriving in a war-torn area heavily armed. Joseph Borrell, the EU's Security Policy High Representative, has said that training for the establishment of such a force could kick off as early as the second half of 2023, with Germany seemingly eager to be the first country to lead the intervention force once it is created. While news that the EU could soon have its own military fighting force will likely be well received by the likes of France's Emmanuel Macron and Germany's Olaf Scholz, other smaller EU nations, especially those that have traditionally aimed to remain military neutral, will likely have other views. The plans will also hand further legitimacy to those who advocate for leaving the European Union across the continent, with the likes of arch-Brexiteer Nigel Farage long warning that senior politicians within the bloc desire the creation of an EU army. It wanted its own police force, it wanted its own independent foreign policy without anyone being able to veto it within the club, and it absolutely wants its own army, air force, and navy, Farage said last year. Whenever I tried to make that argument, I was shouted down. I was treated as being some sort of liar, he continued, with one pro-EU politician having lambasted the populist as believing in a dangerous fantasy that the EU wants a military force during a debate a number of years before the Brexit referendum. So guys, this is a big deal. Here we have, there's several things in this article which I believe can be directly linked to Bible prophecy. One is this idea that people who want to leave, just pro-Brexit type of politicians, this is going to give fuel to the fire of other countries maybe wanting to leave the EU. When we look at Daniel chapter 2, what do we see? We see this final world empire described that tries to strengthen itself. Large and small nations trying to come together and form a more strengthened alliance, but it says, as iron and clay do not mix, they will struggle to hold together. So we've been seeing the struggle to hold the European Union together for decades now. Brexit was one of the most recent examples. We could see more of this soon, but this also leads us to, well, this formation of a European Union military. They talk about a 5,000 man force. And at first glance, you can look at that and say, well, 5,000 man force is not really going to be anything to reckon with. But once they get that in place, because you look at the missions they're talking about for this, deployment to a region, heavily armed, you're deploying to a region to keep peace, to bring stability. A 5,000 man force can't do that. But the first step is to establish that 5,000 person force, and then they roll out more and more and more through mission creep. Oh, well, we have to go in and do this now, and 5,000 isn't enough. So it grows bigger and bigger and bigger. The other thing this does is someone has to command these troops in the field. You can't have every nation in the EU having to be in complete agreement in order for those forces to be deployed, or they will never be deployed. So some sort of command structure has to be set up for this. Then you also have to look at what are the foreign policy implications, because deployment of troops is traditionally a foreign policy function. So who's going to speak with that one voice for the European Union? As we've seen with the war in Ukraine, each member nation has taken upon themselves to speak for themselves, and they haven't had a unified voice, and that's been a problem. So you can see where many of these politicians in the European Union are going to advocate for, we can't have this happening. We have to have a united front. We need one voice. We need some sort of figurehead, someone who can negotiate and speak on behalf of the entire European Union. And so this sets up the potential for this EU military force. Now, the European Union, when you combine all the countries of the European Union, at least prior to all the shortages we're seeing and the spike in energy prices, they're the largest economy in the world. That may change here as we get more figures that come in based on these skyrocketing energy prices. But prior to all of that, they were the largest economy in the world collectively, which means they had the ability to fund and build the largest military in the world if they so chose. And we could very well see that coming about the beginnings of this. So this has huge prophetic significance because we live in the season of the Lord's return, which all the signs say we do. We would expect to see this happening, and we are. So this is one we're going to keep our eyes on. Next article I want to point out, this is from oilprice.com. It says Pakistan has no option but to ration natural gas supply this winter. It says Pakistan has no other option but to ration natural gas supply this winter, with gas price provided 3 times a day for cooking to households amid acute shortages and a foreign exchange crisis in the world's 5th most populous country. The energy crisis in Pakistan has deepened this year, and now natural gas supplies will be very limited for households. There will be no gas supply to household consumers for 16 hours a day, Mohammed Mahmood told the Parliament's Standing Committee on Petroleum. Pakistani households will have gas available for 3 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon, and 3 hours in the evening, he added. Pakistan, whose population is the 5th largest in the world after China, India, the United States, and Indonesia, has been experiencing an energy crisis as the country cannot afford to import a lot of energy products at the current high prices. The stronger US dollar and the sky-high liquid natural gas prices have worsened the country's finances, with foreign exchange reserves down in October to their lowest level in 3 years. In April, soaring prices of LNG and coal on the international markets left Pakistan with having to cut electricity supply to households and industry as the country, in a deep political and economic crisis, could not afford to buy more of the expensive fossil fuels. This year, Europe has been outbidding Asian customers for LNG supply as it has scrambled to secure gas supply with very low pipeline imports from Russia. High spot rates for LNG have discouraged many buyers and users of the super-chilled fuel in Asia, including in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And what do we always say? The lead is buried at the bottom. I think that paragraph really sums up what the problem is. Guys, we've talked about this in the past. About most of the year, we've talked about how these, really in relation to food, but we see this with energy now. We're going to see it with fertilizer because fertilizer is a byproduct of this energy. But what's happening here is countries with more wealth are outbidding the ones with less wealth in order to get these critical supplies that are in shortage, whether it's energy, fertilizer, food, whatever it is. In this case, it's energy. So there are two ways you can receive natural gas: through pipeline or through liquefied natural gas. Pakistan has been receiving theirs through liquefied natural gas. Well, when Russia's pipeline to Europe was cut off, the demand by Europe for liquefied natural gas went through the roof, and they have the wealth and the ability, at least for the time, to bid that price up into the stratosphere, into a range that countries like Pakistan can no longer afford that. So rather than seeing acute shortages throughout Europe, which we may still see as the winter goes along, we're going to see really expensive prices for sure in Europe, but those expensive prices come at the expense of countries like Pakistan that won't be able to obtain the fuel because they don't have the resources to bid for it in the face of some of these more wealthier countries. And we've talked all year about how this was coming toward the end of the year with food, and we would see the same thing. We would see this shortage of food that's available for export. And the countries that want to import it, that have the wealth, that import a lot of food, like Japan, would be able to outbid other countries without those resources. Here we're seeing it with energy, but we're also seeing it with food, as we see in this article. This is from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO. It says, alarming signs as the global food import bill set to rise to nearly $2 trillion due to higher prices. The World Food Import Bill is estimated to rise to $1.94 trillion in 2022, higher than previously expected, according to a new report released today by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. A new forecast presented in FAO's Food Outlook would mark an all-time high and a 10% increase over the record level of 2021. Although the pace of the increase is expected to slow down in response to higher world food prices and depreciating currencies against the US dollar. Both weigh on the purchasing power of importing countries and subsequently on the volumes of imported food. That's a key sentence, guys. That means they're going to slow down. These price increases, or the amount spent, is going to slow down in its increase, not because food prices are coming down or stabilizing, but because countries that otherwise would import that food will no longer be able to afford it. And that will cut down on the volumes of imported food, meaning they won't have it. It says the bulk of the increase in the bill is accounted for by high-income countries, due mostly to higher world prices, while volumes are also expected to rise. Economically vulnerable country groups are being more affected by the higher prices. For instance, the aggregate food import bill for the group of low-income countries is expected to remain almost unchanged, even though it is predicted to shrink by 10% in volume terms, pointing to a growing accessibility interest issue for those countries. In other words, they're going to spend the same amount to import food, but the food prices have gone up. So if they're spending the same amount and the price has gone up, they're going to get less food. And they call it a growing accessibility issue. That's a nice way of dressing up there's going to be a shortage of food in those countries, which is going to lead to the best case scenario, uncomfortable people, and the worst case scenarios, famine. So it says these are alarming signs from a food security perspective, indicating importers are finding it difficult to finance rising international costs, potentially heralding an end of their resilience to higher international prices. The Food Outlook report, which breaks down food trade patterns by food groups, warns that existing differences are likely to become more pronounced, with high-income countries continuing to import across the entire spectrum of food products, while developing regions are increasingly focused on staple foods. The Food Outlook also assesses global expenditures on imported agricultural inputs, including fertilizers. So here we have the same thing happening with fertilizers that's happening with natural gas. It's happening with food. Now we see it with the fertilizers. It says the global import bill is expected to rise to 424 billion in 2022, up 48% from the year before and as much as 112% from 2020. So these poorer countries have to compete on the open market with the wealthiest countries when it comes to getting fertilizer, which means in the end, they're not going to get as much fertilizer as they've gotten in the past. And that's what the rest of this article goes on to say. It says higher cost for imported energy and fertilizer are behind the foreseen increase. Both are particularly relevant in import bills, posing strains for the current accounts of low-income and lower middle-income countries. As a result, some countries may be forced to reduce input applications. That means fertilizer applications, almost inevitably resulting in lower agricultural productivity and lower domestic food availability. Negative repercussions for global agricultural output and food security are likely to extend into 2023, according to FAO. Now, let's add to that because 2023 is 6-7 weeks away? So these negative repercussions are going to go all throughout 2023, into 2024, and potentially beyond, because what they're saying is the poorer countries are not going to be able to import as much food because they have to compete for that food with other wealthier countries and they can't afford to pay that. So less food is going to be imported. That means they need to rely on what they've grown at home. But they're also having to compete on the open market with these wealthier countries when it comes to fertilizer. And if they can't do that, which they're not going to be able to, they're going to have lower crop yields, less production. So they'll have less production domestically, and they're going to be able to get less on the open market to import. But the number of people are going to remain the same. Same number of mouths to feed, but a whole lot less food. So this is inevitably going to lead to famine. And this is what we've been saying for months as we've watched this slowly roll out, that by the end of 2022 and into 2023, we would see famine. This confirms that that is coming. Unfortunately, we had hoped that this wouldn't be the case, but it's very clear at this point that that is the case, because here we are at the end of the year, just as we've been saying for months, and we're seeing this take place. So, again, what can we do about this? Again, do everything you can to take care of yourself, your family, set some food aside for a food bank. Try to save so that you can give to some of these international charities and we can help distribute some of this food and some of the extra that the wealthier countries have. But this is going to hit everywhere. It's not just the poorest countries that are going to be impacted. Everyone will be. The poor, no matter what country they live, will be impacted through price inflation, if not a lack of availability. So what they're saying is some of these poorer countries, the food isn't going to be available because of lower domestic production due to the fertilizer, inability to get fertilizer, due to the inability to import food. The food won't be there. The wealthier countries, the food will be there, but it's going to be a lot more expensive. And that means the poorest of those countries are going to really struggle to be able to afford that food. So we can help our neighbor as much as we can, but right now this is what's coming on the world, so you need to prepare for it and understand Jesus pointed to famine as one of the signs that would precede his return. He also pointed to pestilence, and we've seen that in the recent past. So we have famine coming now. We have all the other signs Jesus said to look for. It's very clear we live in the season of the Lord's return. So on to this next article. This one's from Zero Hedge. It says Binance dominates crypto exchange landscape. Now, for those of you who have been paying attention, there's this large cryptocurrency exchange, FTX, that went belly up last week. There's fraud allegations, all sorts of internal controls that just were not in place. And unfortunately, a lot of people are going to lose a lot of money. I've seen estimates anywhere from $10 billion to $60 billion just completely gone as a result of a collapse of this cryptocurrency exchange. And so this article, we're going to read this, and this talks about this industry. We're going to talk about how this relates to end times Bible prophecy. So this says, despite crypto evangelists describing the current situation, that would be FTX, and the cryptocurrency market is just another dip, the phenomenon known as crypto winter has real and possibly lasting consequences for one of the more volatile finance sectors. As Statista's Florian Zant details below, since May, 38 companies in the crypto industry have laid off employees. Among them, crypto exchanges BitMEX and Coinbase, crypto service providers Crypto.com and Blockchain.com, as well as NFT marketplace OpenSea. Now, 130 companies in the FTX group, owning the crypto exchange FTX, have officially filed for bankruptcy due to a liquidity crunch caused by several factors. The chief reasons cited were increased user withdrawals starting November 6th, and the revelation that Alameda Research, a company in the FTX group, had a significant portion of its holdings in FTX's own FTT coin. Following this discovery, rival company Binance divested its FTT holdings, which caused the coin's value to fall drastically. According to now resigned Chief Executive Sam Bankman-Fried, the company would have needed $9.4 billion to stave off collapse. As Statista's chart shows, the default of FTX could hurt a shaky-kneed crypto industry even further. And so this shows the size of the exchanges with the highest trading volume. So on these platforms, people are, think of it as Charles Schwab or Fidelity, these online brokerages where people can trade stocks and options. Well, here they're going to these exchanges, and you set up an account and you can trade cryptocurrencies. And there are hundreds of these cryptocurrencies that people speculate on. So they're saying Binance did $4.6 trillion of volume year to date versus FTX about $600 billion. And this ranks all of these different exchanges. So we're talking about trillions of dollars in trading volume on these different platforms, and all of it is unregulated. And so what we saw here when FTX collapsed, which based on fraudulent activity that was taking place, there's all sorts of allegations that'll be sorted out in due time, but you saw essentially a bank run, a modern day bank run. Now, in the United States, if you have your money in a bank up to the FDIC limit, that's Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, then and the bank fails, the bank goes bankrupt, then the government has come in and essentially guaranteed that you will receive your money back up to a certain limit. And so people feel that that's a risk we're taking, is to put my cash into that bank, because if it does go bankrupt, I can get it back. The government can always print the cash, so they're pretty good for it. Same is true if you're trading stocks with, let's say, Fidelity, and you go online at Fidelity, you have either cash in your account to trade, or you have hundreds of shares of stock. If Fidelity were to go bankrupt, then you have the Securities Investor Protection Corporation, SIPC, which serves a lot of the same purpose as FDIC, where they would come in, and even though the brokerage firm went bankrupt, the investors would be returned either their cash or their shares. And so here you would expect there to be something like, if the crypto exchange collapses, you would be guaranteed either whatever cash you had in your account or the underlying cryptocurrency holdings that you had. But there's nothing like that. This is a completely unregulated industry. So when this collapsed, everyone who had accounts, who had money here, it just disappeared. They can become a creditor as part of the bankruptcy proceedings, but they may never see that cash again. And there's a lot of big institutions as well as retail investors that have had money in FTX. So let's look at this article, which talks about some of those investors who lost money, so we can get a perspective of what does all this mean. So this says a list of investors whose money in FTX is gone after biggest ever crypto fraud. It says, now that the world's largest crypto exchange, Binance, has walked away from a bailout of the world's second largest crypto exchange, FTX, but biggest ever crypto fraud, here's a list of all the, quote, luminary investors whose money in FTX is now gone. All gone. We start at the top, where we find the who is who of clueless momentum chasers. Now this is a blog post where they're putting in their commentary as we go along. But it says, Tiger Global, which is down 55% year to date. This is a hedge fund. They're about to be down a whole lot more. And of course, the fund that we once dubbed the bubble era's short of the century, SoftBank. So it says there are more funds, of course. Third Point and Altimeter Capital Management are among the hedge funds that recently participated in funding rounds for Sam Bankman-Fried's once high-flying crypto exchange, Brevin Howard Asset Management's Alan Howard, the family office of Paul Tudor Jones. Paul Tudor Jones is one of the most celebrated investors of the last 40 years. So these are people that you would expect to have had more due diligence than what we saw with this. It says a Millennium Management founder, Izzy Englander, also chipped in as angel investors alongside celebrities including Gisele Bündchen and Tom Brady. There were many others. FTX also attracted capital from the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund, Sequoia Capital, Lightspeed Venture Partners, Iconic Capital, Insight Partners, Thoma Bravo, and Masayoshi Son's SoftBank. And then they have a bullet list mentioning some of those same companies, but BlackRock, Van Eck. These are companies that are big in the retail investor space, big on Wall Street. These are not small players. Now, the sums of money involved for some of these companies may not be that significant. For others, they may be very much significant. But you have to wonder, what is the spillover effect from this? And what happens if some of those other players, so let's turn back and look at this list of players. What if those who have accounts at all these other crypto exchanges say, I'm not sure that I want to risk my funds there, and we have essentially a modern day bank run? We could see that happen, and we could see more of these crypto exchanges completely collapse. What is the contagion effect from that as it hits all these big Wall Street firms, as it hits banks? We don't yet know how big all of this collapse was, because some of these hedge funds that had large amounts of their holdings here, they may have been leveraged based on funds they were loaned from a major bank. We don't know. All of this will start to come out in due time. But regardless, I think this is very big, because what is going to happen with all these major players being involved is we're going to see much more government. We're going to see the government move into the space to regulate it, to essentially take it over. And what are we going to see on the other side of that? Well, I think we're going to see that the safe crypto to own is going to be the one issued by your government. That's where they're going to turn to, was central bank digital currencies are going to be the answer, because we can't have people losing their hard-earned money in these exchanges, and we can't risk a contagion effect from these exchanges. They'll completely ignore that Bitcoin is a decentralized digital currency that doesn't have the issues this has if you hold it on your own and not through one of these exchanges. They'll lump Bitcoin in with all of these other cryptocurrencies, and their solution will be central bank digital currencies, government-owned digital securities, or digital currencies. And so what they will do is they're going to take over the role of FTX. And they will determine what you hold, what it's worth, whether or not they want to give it back to you. And people are going to be fenced in. It's going to be like entering a cage. When they roll out these digital, central bank digital currencies, they'll be able to use things like GPS to say, let's fence off Britt. Britt did something that we didn't like. So you know what, Britt? Your central bank digital currency can only be used within 5 miles of your home. So then I would effectively be under house arrest, because my only means of payment would be this central bank digital currency, and I will be prevented from using it outside of a certain area that they decree. Or they could say, you can only spend it on certain products, and they could put a lockdown. So this currency could be reprogrammed on an individual basis, and they can use it as a weapon to take out political opponents, anyone that stands against the government, as we saw with the Canadian trucker protesters. They parked their trucks, they honked some horns. They were supposed to have a right to free speech, a right to protest, but instead their government went out and froze their bank accounts. So that's where we're headed with all of this central bank digital currency. And this story that we're seeing now is going to lead to the regulation and possibly legislation that then rolls out those central bank digital currencies. So guys, we live in the season of the Lord's return, have no doubt about it. We see all of the signs that Jesus and the prophets said to look for converging right now. And Jesus said when that happens, he's right at the door. Look up, your salvation draws near. So guys, make sure to leave your comments below, like, share this. God willing, I'll see you tomorrow. Bye. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to sign up for my free monthly newsletter and get your copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Just follow the link in the description to get your free book. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.